Hey y'all, welcome to another weekly live session with yours truly, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. This week's topic is what role do you play specifically as it relates to colorism in TV and movies? So if you're new to my channel or if this is your first time encountering any of my content, this is part 10 or episode 10 in an ongoing live series I'm doing this fall on colorism and media. But I have years of content both on my website and blog format, on this YouTube channel and video format, posts, reels, all types of things on various social media platforms. So I encourage you to binge content on your preferred platform. While you are coming into the show, if you're able to participate in the chat, go ahead and say hi. Let me know where you're tuning in from. And let me know what your zodiac sign is. I am a Gemini sun and rising and a Capricorn moon. And then I always like to start off each episode by setting my intention so that you can know if you're in the right place, if this is your vibe tribe. So my first intention is to have fun, making genuine connections in real time. So again, thanks to everyone who watches, but special thanks to people who do participate in the chat. That means a lot to me. I also want to have creative conversations that go deeper, that peel back the layers, that see what's lurking behind the scenes or behind the surface, right? And so when it comes to media and entertainment in particular, we are not of the mindset that it's quote unquote just entertainment or just a movie or just a show or quote unquote just a commercial. Again, one of my favorite episodes this season was episode 2 on propaganda and why we need to pay attention to the media, why we need to pay attention to things that might on the surface seem like just entertainment, okay, because they have real world consequences. And then my last intention is to facilitate collective healing and transformation, right? And so that oftentimes that will start with your personal healing and transformation, but we definitely want our healing and transformation to have ripple effects to the people around us and to the larger world, okay? I also want to create space for we're in between eclipses. We had the Libra eclipse last week and we have the Taurus eclipse coming up next week. And the world is unsettled, right? The world globally, various places, people are struggling, people are dying, people are suffering, people are starting new chapters in their life. People are also having beautiful moments. People are still getting married, still giving birth, right? There's just a lot going on in the world, so much so. And I think in the age of digital media and the age of YouTube and social media, it's like now we're constantly being made aware of all that's going on and happening in the world. And so if you are in immediate danger, I want you to prioritize that and to seek support and safety. But for those of us who are not in immediate danger, I do want us to take care of our nervous systems, okay? It is my personal belief that I am more effective in my fight for social justice. I am more effective to show up in service to others when I am taking care of myself as well. So I encourage you to lean into whatever self-care practices you need at this time, okay? So let me start again with my throwback photo of the week. If you have not seen my other episodes for the fall series, I always start with the throwback photo of myself. So this was circa 2017, maybe, I don't know. I was in grad school. I was a PhD student at LSU. And the Black Graduate Student and Professional Association hosted a fair, like a fair where creative Black people in the community could sell their products or their art or their craft. And so I was selling the first ever Colorism Healing anthology. So again, I've gotten a lot of new followers in the past year or two. One of the first flagship initiatives of Colorism Healing was the creative writing contest. It started off as just poetry, opened up to essays and short stories and that sort of thing. And so that anthology that's on the table, that book on the table in this photo, was the physical product of that first initiative. And it was indeed an international contest. And part of doing my work around colorism, those early days of blogging, having people from all over the world reach out to me, and the fact that, there were people in Brazil who were reading my blogs kind of really opened my mind to the scope of what colorism is as a global issue. And the reason I started blogging, the reason why I started the contest is because I am a writer, is because I am a creative writer. When I was a professor, one of the primary reason they hired me was to teach creative writing specifically, right? And so when I thought about, in 2011, 2012, 2013, how I can best address colorism in that moment, how best to show up and raise awareness around this issue, I knew I wanted to write because I am a writer. I wanted to write about it. And so I'm sharing this example, this story of one of the ways I've stepped into my role to help dismantle colorism and all related systems of oppression by looking at what I was interested in, looking at what my talents are. And so part of what I want to talk about today, yes, we're talking about colorism and the media, but specifically my framework is what's our agency? What can we do? Right? And I realize that this whole series has been more about that than it has about analyzing or critiquing specific pieces of media, right? And so I kind of am like being transparent here. I know a lot of times when we have a video that says colorism in the media, it's often a video that looks at a particular piece of media and explains how colorism shows up in that media, right? And I've done that a few times, but I just feel more interested in helping us understand what we can do, what's our responsibility, what is our role in helping to create change in this media, right? I just remembered that I have not stopped to say hello to people in the chat. So let me do that now. Hey, Michael. Hey, Miriam B. Welcome back. I have some regulars. I am so honored and flattered that I have some regular viewers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, so let me continue. The poll, I think that's the next slide. Yes, so the poll for the week was asking people, how satisfied are you with dark skin representation on TV and movies? So we have 4% of 49 votes say extremely happy with it. 51%, so just over half of the people said we can do better, right? And then 45% of the people said makes me angry just thinking about it. And full transparency, I was part of that 45%. I voted on my own poll and I was like, it makes me angry just thinking about it. And yes, I laugh sometimes when I'm angry or releasing the stress of the conversation. And I was thinking about this first response and how 4% of 49, I'm not a mathematician, so you all can calculate how many people that were who said they were extremely happy with it. I'm curious to know, right, if those people have already gone through a process of curating their media intake, right? I'm wondering if that answer, that response is coming because those individuals have subscribed to the all black TVs and they've curated their social media feeds and they find the TV shows and the artists and the movies that they like, right? And so I think sometimes that answer is born of effort, right? Not necessarily that the media particularly is doing a good job, but that my unique exposure to the media, what I'm exposing myself to actually is quite satisfying for me. Now, again, these people didn't explain why they answered the question that way, but that's one thing I wonder or ponder about. All right. So I want to share the big questions, 2 big questions that you can keep in the back of your mind as I talk with you today, as you go forward in the week ahead. What role have I played in perpetuating or upholding oppressive systems? I've asked this question a million times, specifically related to colorism. What role have I played in perpetuating it or upholding it? And let me clarify that we all have likely perpetuated or upheld some type of institution or oppression or system or prejudice or bias at some point. Because 1, no human is perfect. 2, when we are young and being indoctrinated by media, by parents, that sort of thing, a lot of times we have to go through a process of unlearning those things, okay? And so this is, again, not to judge ourselves, not to shame each other or to shame ourselves, but it's to have awareness, and from that awareness, know how we can create change. And then the second question is, what role do I play, or what role can I play in helping to dismantle XYZ, right? So what role am I already playing, right? Acknowledging the work you're already doing. And just shout out, I was telling a friend of mine this, I was talking about my live streams and she was saying how, well, the average person doesn't think like that and you and I think like that. And I kind of corrected her. I was like, well, my followers actually do think very critically. I have to say, I have my subscribers and followers in my online communities tend to be very, very intelligent, tend to already be critical thinkers. And I think that's why we're attracted to each other. I think that's why you like spending time with me and I like spending time with y'all, is because we're on the same vibe. Even when we disagree, even when we don't have the exact same perspective, I think one thing we all have in common is that we do think critically and we do care about justice and we do want to see some change, right? So that's a little sidebar. But think about, acknowledge what you have already been doing in terms of your work, but then also ask, what else could I be doing, right? Or what could I do differently to help to dismantle these systems? And thinking about the roles that people play, I just wanted to share. So even though I'm not doing a deep dive or a deep analysis into particular movies or TV shows, I wanted to share some of my favorite roles portrayed by dark-skinned women in the media, okay? So first, Being Mary Jane by Gabrielle Union, starring Gabrielle Union. Now, I don't relate to Mary Jane as a character in a lot of ways, in pretty significant ways, but in other significant major ways, I absolutely related to Being Mary Jane, okay? She was a single, dark-skinned Black woman with a ambitious career, and she was also dealing with, various racism, misogynoir in society. One of my favorite episodes of Being Mary Jane was when she was driving and there was a conflict in the parking lot, and this white guy, I think she took this white guy's parking space or something like that, or she took too long to back out of the parking lot, and he either called her the N-word or he called her a monkey, right? He used some type of racial slur towards her. And so she went home, she sat down in her closet, and she just started crying. Like, she just broke down crying in her closet, right? And I think that part of the Being Mary Jane story, like, really, really resonated with me. You have this, again, dark-skinned Black woman who has ambitions for her life, but is having to face and navigate misogynoir and racism and sexism and colorism, right? And all those things. Another one of my favorites, y'all already know, because I was going hard for this movie. I was going hard in the paint to help promote this movie and tell people to go see it. It's The Woman King, right? With my girl Viola Davis. And I just want to say Viola Davis and her husband have their own production company. And I like that. One thing I like about Viola Davis is that she has portrayed a range of characters. She's done all types of stories and narratives where she starred in, but I also like that she is one of the activists in the industry, right? There are many activists in the industry, but Viola Davis being a dark-skinned Black woman, and I did a vlog on her Finding Me memoir, where she talks extensively about colorism and her experiences with colorism in the industry, how people, just tore her apart when she got the role in How to Get Away with Murder, and other Black people in the industry, right? Her other Black colleagues in the industry saying, well, she's not feminine enough. She's not pretty enough for that role, or she's not going to be convincing in that role because she's not one of the pretty ones, right? And so she was very, very honest and candid about just the rampant colorism and misogynoir that she has experienced in the decades of her career. And then I'm going to end on one of my absolute favorites. Okay. I know I'm like a broken record because I promote and hype up the same people all the time, but I got my favorites. Okay. Let me tell y'all, Issa Rae is the GOAT in my book. Okay. First of all, we the same age. I know. And I'm like, girl, you motivate me. You motivate me to like do my thing, to do what I came here to do. Right. But I discovered her through Awkward Black Girl, of course. And then when she got the HBO show Insecure, we were so excited. Like, all of her Awkward Black Girl friends were so fans, rather. Although I think the way it originally came out makes sense too, her Awkward Black girlfriends. But also her Awkward Black Girl fans were so excited for Insecure to come out. And one of the things I love about Insecure is not only was she a dark-skinned main character, but she cast multiple other dark-skinned main characters, right? And again, the variety of these dark-skinned women, where they weren't all just one note. They weren't all just flat characters or just the usual stereotypes. So I just really appreciate these three women and the way that they have what they've done for representation for dark-skinned Black women in particular, right? And even the Being Mary Jane poster that I have, right? Like seeing Gabrielle Union in a wedding gown, right? Like that's part of representation that we need to repair the history of misrepresentation. Okay, so part of what I want to do, again, in terms of the framework and us thinking about what we can do, like what really is our role in mitigating, navigating, critiquing, dismantling colorism in the industry and movies and TV. I want to present to us some truths about what I think are truths, things I believe about the roles that we play in any system of oppression, but using colorism as a test sample, right? One, we can have multiple roles, all right? So as we're having this discussion, I want you to know that you're not just like pigeonholed into like one little small box. Like people can have multiple roles at the same time. And we see this in everyday life where you can be both a teacher and also be going back to school at the same time. You could be a daughter and a mother at the same time. You could be a sister and not a sister at the same time, right? And then also our roles can evolve or change throughout our lifetime. So what my role was in dismantling colorism 10 years ago won't necessarily be my role in dismantling colorism in the next 10 years, right? Like I said at my 10-year anniversary event, I said I'm still committed to the work, even though it might look a lot different than it has in the past decade, okay? And then also, it's okay and it's necessary for people to have different roles. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that we don't have to have a hierarchy of roles. I think there's this celebrityfication of like activism and the celebrityfication of like being woke, where it's like, oh, I'm doing it in this particular way. And the particular way that I do it is socially validated and socially admired and respected. But that doesn't mean that your work is more important than someone else's role that is ignored by society or that's deemed less relevant. And even if we think about even like patriarchal roles, how like stay-at-home moms have been devalued throughout society, right? Like, oh, well, you're just staying at home, you're not doing any kind of work, right? And so this binary of certain roles are worthy of respect and other roles are not worthy of respect. I think we have to kind of unlearn that and unpack that. And then the fourth thing is that just because we're not aware of what role we play doesn't mean we aren't playing one. Okay, so I got to pause here for a second and explain this. Oh, I meant to make myself bigger. Let me do this. I didn't mean to be a little box that whole time. Just because we're not aware of what role we play doesn't mean we aren't playing one. I think one of the roles in a social system is ignorant, right? Is mass ignorance, right? Like that is a role that oppressive systems need people to play in order to sustain themselves, in order to perpetuate themselves, right? And so our lack of awareness of how we're participating in a system is one of the roles that maintains that system, that helps that system to thrive and to flourish, is having masses of people who are unconscious about their roles in it. And let me be clear, systemically, the ones who pull the puppet strings, the ones who hold power, go out of their way to occlude the truth. They go out of their way to obscure that knowledge, to hide that information, to not allow you to see behind the curtain, right? Because they are relying on your ignorance about a system to maintain that system. And so again, we're not on the social media episode yet, but one of the powers of social media is that the centralization of knowledge has been dismantled, right? Whereas a very few percentage or very small percentage of society held knowledge, held information, controlled information, we're seeing the dismantling of that. We've seen the dismantling of that gradually over time as more and more people have choice in where they get their information from, as more and more people start to be able to talk to each other and not just have to rely on one central source of all the knowledge and information, right? And so part of the long game in dismantling these systems is just raising people's awareness about the fact that there even is a system, right? Because we have some people that are along the spectrum of knowledge where you're like, oh, where you see the light bulb go off and they're like, oh yeah, that is true. Like I never thought about it that way, right? All the way up into the people who are starting to be self-aware and be like, oh, okay, so when I do this, this is a manifestation of a larger system at play, right? And so again, we're not blaming ourselves for the systems that are at play, but we are going to be responsible for once we do have that awareness and knowledge, okay, what am I going to do with that going forward? Y'all already know how I roll. I'm reiterating the same thing I've been saying for years. Okay, and some categories of roles, just as examples, feel free to add insight in the chat as you are likely to do anyway. So there might be other types of roles that people can play, but just to get your juices flowing, just to get your brains going, one, you can have an active or a passive role, right? And so when you're thinking about that first question, let me go back a few slides. Oh, here we go. When I asked, what role have you played and what role can you play? I want you to think, have I been playing an active role in dismantling the system? Have I been playing a passive role in accepting this form of oppression, right? And so these are more self-reflective. Again, it's not for me to look at you and put you in a box. And related to that, have I been playing my roles intentionally? Have I consciously chosen or stepped into particular roles? Or have I just kind of been operating unintentionally and unconsciously and just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks, right? Have I been more of a creator in this space? Have I been more of a producer in this space? Or do I tend to be more of a consumer, right? And so that, number 3, the third bullet point, is particularly relevant for the media, whether you create content on social media or you just really consume content on social media, right? I'm thinking about my mom, who I know always watches my live streams. Hey, Mom. My mom would definitely be a consumer, right? My mom doesn't actually create her own online content, but she's on there to consume a lot of content, right? And so again, asking yourself that question, do I primarily consume in this space or do I primarily create in this space, or a little bit of both? Again, we can have multiple roles at the same time. Am I more of a giver or a receiver? Again, culturally, we demonize and we place greater value on one of these roles over the other, but giving and receiving are both inherently equal and good, right? Like there might be times where I need to give money in this particular cause, but then there are other times when I need to be the one receiving that money, right? There might be times where I need to give medical aid, but then there's going to come a time when I need to receive medical aid, right? And so again, it's this flow of energy. And then are we more of an organizer or supporter? When I was creating this bullet list, I thought of organizers as, for example, the people who always are organizing the rallies, putting out the flyers, telling people where to meet, figuring out parking for all these rallies and protests and pickets. And then there are the supporters who are, well, like they're not doing the logistics of making sure this thing happens, but they're going to show up every time, right? And I think both people are important. Like both people are necessary. Like you can have someone planning a rally, but you need like those masses of supporters to show up to make that rally successful, right? And so both roles are necessary. And then I was thinking about my nephew, who's a great athlete and a great humanitarian already at the age of 11. Offense versus defense, our coach versus trainer. And I'm going to apply this to colorism and social justice specifically, but I want to stick with the sports analogy for a second. So when you think about certain sports like football, where there's clearly like you're an offensive player and clearly you're a defensive player, right? And there's not a whole lot of crossover between those people or those athletes versus a sport like tennis or volleyball or basketball, where the same group of people have to have the dexterity to move back and forth between both of those roles, right? And then coach or trainer, this is where I was thinking about my nephew, and I don't know if my sister's watching, but I'm using my nephew as an example. How we always tell him that if he's watching everyone else on the court and trying to control what everyone else does on the court, then he's less effective in his role, right? He has a unique role to play on the team. He plays basketball. And oftentimes when you're so focused on like, oh, you're not in the right spot, then you miss a pass, right? Like, or if you're trying to tell someone else to like, hurry up and get down the court, then someone comes behind you and steals the ball, right? And so there's this thing of, I see it happening a lot where we're so busy policing everybody else's roles that oftentimes we literally drop the ball when it comes to our own role, right? And so I think that analogy for my nephew, he still has to like learn and grow and really develop his own skills. And oftentimes, like, you can be a player on the team and still have like a leadership role, right? But it's this lack of focus on your task first, because you're so focused on trying to micromanage what everybody else is doing in that space. And the other thing, when it comes to how we show up and policing each other's roles, when I think about offense versus defense, one of my experiences as a social media person and doing like educating and sharing ideas on the internet is you have people whose inclination, like their default mode, is to be negative, right? Or to try to tear you down, or to nitpick, right? Or to be overly critical about everything. And I used to have this thing where I'm like, if you only ever engage in my content to criticize it, then that's not an equal exchange of energy, right? I'm not saying that I can't ever be critiqued or that you can't ever disagree with me, but there are some people who only will ever criticize, right? And never offer anything constructive, or never offer anything in the way of support or even being informative. And so that's also something we have to be honest with ourselves about, right? If we are engaging in this dialogue, am I trying to tear the other person down, or am I actually being like constructive in this? And sometimes things happen and we get really passionate about things, and our intention might not be to be destructive or to try to destroy that person and tear them down, but that could still be the effect, right? And so again, I connected to the need, like in all that criticism you have for me, you're draining your life force and your energy and your attention to be effective in what you need to do, right? Like if I'm so focused on tearing down this other person who's not doing it the way I think they should, that's time, energy, intellectual resources, emotional resources that could be fed into what my purpose is. So before I jump on someone else's comment, before I jump on someone else's page and try to control and dictate what they do and how they do it, what they shouldn't do, I'm like, how can I take that same energy and use it to build up my own platform? How can I take that same energy and use it to feed my own audience, right? Instead of trying to assert myself in someone else's lane. So that was a lot for that slide. Let me keep going. So I want to bring it back to the media specifically before I check back on the chat. So as creators, I think about the media, you have creators and consumers, and usually creators are also consumers, but a lot less consumers are also creators, right? So I want to start with creators because it's a smaller portion of the population, and I want to end with consumers because it's a much larger portion of the population. So if you are a creator of TV and movies, 3 things that you might do, 3 roles you might play, and you might play all 3, you might play just one. The first one is hiring dark-skinned people. So if you are a hirer, if you're the one that give people jobs in the media and entertainment and TV and movies, one role you can play is giving more jobs, more opportunities to dark-skinned people, right? And paying them equitably, creating environments where they can thrive, right? So this is sort of like the producer, director, casting directors, but also HR, right? Also senior management and like various studios and companies and things like that. A third role you might play as a creator of entertainment and movies and television of various types is educating yourself and others on the technical knowledge and skills for portraying or representing dark-skinned people, right? And so that includes things like makeup artists. If you are a makeup artist in the industry, do you make sure you know how to work with all skin tones and hair textures and hair types and hairstyles, right? Do you know how to pick and choose color palettes that are complementary to all skin tones? And maybe part of your role, if you do have those skills, maybe part of your role is educating or sharing that knowledge and skills with other people. And then the third role you could play if you're on the creative side of TV and movies, is repairing historical under and misrepresentation. So this for me is more so the writers and the creative direction of TV and movies. Okay, so the first bullet point was more so for like HR and hiring, which also was a little bit of creative direction. Second part was educating all the technical things, whether it be like lighting and camera and again, choosing the colorist, choosing the color palettes and hairstyles. And then this third one is for our writers, our directors, and is Are the narratives you're telling, are the stories you're telling, are the segments that you're doing, are the close-ups, are the, what do you call those, the feature interviews and things like that, behind the scenes footage, all the things that you are doing creatively, are they repairing, bringing justice to, healing, rectifying, reparations for, affirmative action for the long history of underrepresenting and misrepresenting dark-skinned people across time and space. And then I want to end with us as consumers. So again, that speaks to a whole much larger swath of us. Is one, what do you watch? And I know this might seem very basic, but sometimes you got to go back to basics, y'all. Like sometimes we, keep going and we lose sight of the basics, right? So what do you watch, right? Like that's one of the roles you play in this larger system of entertainment, in the larger system of media. Again, we need both sides of that equation. We need people who create it, but they create it for people to watch. And so you as a watcher also have a role to play. The second thing is, what shows and movies do you amplify, promote, and recommend? So it's one thing to like, oh, okay, I'm going to watch all these shows and I don't really have a preference for what types of shows I watch. But if you're serious about participating and engaging in the dismantling of colorism, you would be intentional about promoting shows and movies that have great representation for dark-skinned people, right? Especially dark-skinned Black women, right? I'm, because I am one, and I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And so really think about, even if you don't have a reason to promote a movie, right? No one's directly asking you for movie recommendations or TV show recommendations. Maybe part of your practice is to amplify them. So if you're watching a really good series where the three main characters are all dark-skinned women of different sizes or different hair textures or different body types, then part of your practice can be making sure that the world knows that those movies exist, knows that that representation exists. And then the third thing, do you offer helpful analysis or critiques to help other people learn? And so, yes, it's frustrating to see instances of colorism. And so that analysis, right, like that public sharing of like why this is colorist, to a public sharing of like how this is colorist. And when I say public, again, you don't have to have an Instagram page or a TikTok page where you're breaking down colorism in all these TV shows. Again, I've said this example before. If you're watching TV with your family, if you're watching TV with your kids, if you're watching TV with your niece or nephew or your friend or your siblings, right? Like they could be your public. It doesn't always have to be this like large platform where it's like, oh, this is my duty to like educate the masses. Like just talking to the person sitting next to you when a colorist commercial comes on, just talking to the person sitting next to you when an instance of colorism happens at the movie theater, and like you leave the movie theater and you're like, you know what? I noticed some colorism in there. What do you think about this, right? And so we all can do that. We all can have multiple roles to play. So again, I'm about to go to the chat. Type in the chat other roles that you have played, other roles that you think people might be able to step into to help mitigate this issue. And before I get to your questions and comments, I want to share your reflection question, which is, what role have I played in colorism? And what roles can I play and want to play going forward? Again, this is very basic, very straightforward, but sometimes it requires that very simple, basic reflection and intentionality to see progress in a certain area. And then your opportunity for growth and transformation is to focus on your work. Okay? Focus on your work. Now, for some people, your work might be to critique other people's work, okay? This is a small portion of the population. Your work is actually to offer feedback and critique and suggestions and ideas on other people's work, right? Like that was my role as a writing professor. When I taught creative writing, one of my roles was to offer feedback on other people's work, okay? But now, the rest of us though, if that's really not our lane, if that's really not our work, we could do a lot less policing of other people's work and simply focus on our work, okay? Because we are more effective in our work. We actually get our work done when we're not looking left and right and being all up in other people's lanes, right? When our lane is kind of in shambles, okay? So stay in your lane, focus on your work. And then the affirmation is I move with purpose and intention. So as I mentioned, all of us play a role. What I'm asking for you is to be intentional about your role. It's to be conscious about your role, right? And not just be playing a role or playing a part and you really don't even know that you are. You're kind of, in that sense, that's when people say, oh, you're being a pawn of the system or you're being used by the system, right? And so cultivate awareness of yourself, and not that you're going to know all the ins and outs of every system, every form of oppression or injustice ever, but the intention, the conscious choosing of, this is how I want to show up in this space. This is how I want to show up for this particular kind of work. So I move with purpose and intention. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. So if you're watching this, you are likely already like on that path. You're likely already one of the people who try to move with intention, which is why you clicked on this video. If you are not intentionally trying to learn about colorism and do something about it, you probably wouldn't even be watching this. So again, I appreciate you. I see you. All the people who are watching live or watching the playback, I see you. The mere fact that you are watching, especially if you're watching this far into the video, you really are intentionally trying to create change around the issue of colorism. And I appreciate you. I respect you. I love you so much, just in general, because you're a human. But also I'm deeply grateful and appreciative that you are lending your time and energy to spread awareness and amplify this conversation. And hopefully it inspires you and gives you tools and a sense of empowerment to then have ripple effects in your family, have ripple effects in your friendship circles and in your professional spaces. Okay. Y'all know I love y'all so much. I love y'all. I love hard. I'm like, y'all my people. All right. So Michael says, I know that's right. We critical thinkers like ancestors, bell hooks. Yes. I'm telling y'all, like, y'all keep me sharp. I'm like, yeah, my friend was like, oh, well, most people, I was like, yeah, but if they watching my channel, like if they following my page, like I've already seen the evidence that the people who engage with my content or follow my content, like one, a lot of them already have their own social justice platforms. A lot of them are already doing anti-racist work or doing DEI work in their own lane, right? So I already know, like, it's, real recognize real, basically. Yeah, Michael says, we friends, we fans, we fine. I'm putting these up on the screen before I read them. Danny says, yeah, that last one, ooh, child. LOL, this is why we need to discover and or create the roles we want to play. Otherwise, we continue to be played. Okay, Danny, listen. So not only are my subscribers and followers, not only are y'all like really smart and critical thinkers and like really about that life already, but y'all are also like funny and witty and like clever and like poetic and like y'all are just let me fawn a little bit. But yeah, so like Danny is saying, if we're not intentional about the roles we play, we are going to get played. Bam. Oh, that's a good one right there. Okay. Says, as someone who is neurodivergent, I'm learning that it's important for me to have freedom to move among many different roles at various times. Sometimes this looks messy to neurotypical folks. Right. So Danny, thank you for this. I'm going to pull out a couple of things from your comment. So again, this is one of the reasons why we don't judge what other people's work looks like. Because we're like, well, this is how I do my work. And other people who aren't doing it the way I would do it, they're wrong, right? We have to make space for people's capacities, for people's interests, for people's natural skills and talents, for people's experiences, their knowledge, right? Like what I could bring to the table as a creative writing teacher, as someone who does that, who has training in that, is different from someone else who has training in martial arts or like doesn't have any training, but they just good at what they do. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, it doesn't have to look. Part of what I'm feeling from Danny's comment too is that we feel compelled to perform our work. We feel compelled to make our work legible to other people so that we don't get criticized online. I'm getting goosebumps. I'm saying that. That's part of the conversation around the Palestinians, what's happening in the Middle East is the call to perform that you are who we think you are, right? The call to perform your work in a particular way that's legible to me. And if your work and the way you show up to your work is not legible to me or not palatable to me, then, you know, you can go to hell, basically. It's how we sometimes treat each other. Miriam B says, I love your analogies. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So some of my favorite people, I don't even know y'all. Like, really, I don't know. I know Michael a little bit because Michael and I have done Zoom calls and we've done like panels and stuff together. But I don't think I've met Danny and Miriam B, like face to face or in real time. But I feel like I know y'all, which is why I like doing these lives, because we can like bond and get to know each other better. But next week, I'm so excited because it's the social media. Let me make sure it's a social media episode. I'm pretty sure it's a social media episode, but I don't want to be telling a lie. Yes, it is the social media episode. So that's going to be fun. That's going to be a good one. When I asked people what segment of media they wanted to focus on, like social media got the most votes. Okay, so I'm hoping, let's try to get like 50 people on the live. Let's try to, because right now my counter's at 15 people watching. Let's see if for the social media episode we can get 50 people watching at the same time. I'm going to speak it into the universe. So I'll see y'all next week. And the title of that one is, Do You Feed Your Feed? I've heard a lot of people say your feed should feed you, which I agree with. But also, the framework I'm coming with next week is, do you feed your feed? All right. Dun, dun, dun. To be continued. All right, y'all. Love and peace. And I'll see y'all next week.